Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'm going to give us about 30 seconds to allow the tech to settle and for people to join us, but we'll be getting going very shortly. Right, we'll get started. So hello again. My name's Rubina Ahmed, and in my day job, I'm the Director of Research, Policy and Services at Blood Cancer UK. But I also have the huge privilege of being a trustee of Pro Bono Economics. So before we get started, I just want to thank you again for joining this session where we'll be exploring the valuable impact of the women and girls social sector and the funding and service demand challenges the sector is currently experiencing. The discussion today really builds on a new report which has been published by PBE, and it's been commissioned by Rosa, Underfunded, Under-Resourced and Under the Radar, the State of the Women and Girls Social Sector. This report is out now and a link should be appearing in the chat. So before we get started, I also wanted to share that the event today is being recorded and will be available on the PBE website and the YouTube channel after the session. We will have some time for questions at the end of the session, so please do submit them in the chat and we'll get to as many as we can. We'd love for you to post about the event on social media. Do tag us on LinkedIn or Blue Sky, or use the hashtag PBE events anywhere else. So I am now going to ask for the rest of our speakers to join us, who'll be popping up onto your screens shortly. And we have a great lineup of speakers today. And I'm going to ask each of them to introduce themselves, tell us a bit about them and the organisations that they're working for. So I'm going to start off with Beth first.
Thanks so much, Rubina, and thank you everyone for joining us. My name is Beth Kitson. I'm a research and policy analyst here at PBE. I'm the author of the report, and here at PBE, we use economic analysis and the insight provided by our connection across the social sector to really help charities, funders, firms and policymakers to tackle the causes and consequences of low well-being.
Thanks, Beth. Cecily.
Yes, I am Cecily Monique here, founder and chief executive for Utulivu Women's Group, an organization that works with women and girls to empower them to fulfill their potential behind or after very difficult life experiences. And it's all about giving them that strength and voice to realize actually the potential they have is far much needed by the wider community.
Thank you. Lola.
Hi everyone, I'm Lola Lauray and I'm the founder of Blossom. Blossom is an organisation that equips young women and girls across the UK and overseas to reach their full potential through various programmes that we run, so early intervention programmes, mentoring programmes, and then also online resources as well. My background is in consulting, so I help consult organisations as well, and I'm also a co-author of a book with a Harvard professor that focuses on the impact of COVID on mental well-being for girls in South Africa, Canada, US, and the UK. And I'm also a Churchill Fellow, currently conducting research on the impact of early intervention programs for disadvantaged youth in South Africa, Brazil, and the UK.
Thank you. And Rebecca, I'm going to come to you next, but also I'd just like you to tell us why Rosa commissioned this report as well.
Thanks, Rubina. So I'm Rebecca Gill and I'm the Chief Executive of Rosa. We're the only UK-based funder that specifically funds women's and girls' organisations across all 4 nations of the UK. And we commissioned this funding and we're this research, and we're delighted to work with PBE to conduct it because we wanted to really understand the challenges facing the women and girls sector at the moment. We've conducted some research in 2020, we published in 2023, which showed that just 1.8% of all charitable grants currently go to women's and girls-led organisations. And we were very concerned by that, but we wanted to understand what impact it was therefore having on the sector itself. So This, we believe, is one of the biggest surveys ever done of the women and girls sector, and it's certainly something that we'd like to try and do again, so we can start to understand the trends over time. But this in its own right is a very, very important snapshot of just how challenging the climate is at the moment for these critical women-led women's and girls organisations.
Thanks, Rebecca, and thanks for so eloquently setting out the importance of this report. So now is the right time to hand over to Beth, who's going to tell us more about the report.
Great. First of all, I just want to say thank you all for being here and taking the time to engage with the report, and especially a huge thank you if you were one of the participants. We're really keen to hear more about your thoughts and reactions to the report and where we might want to go from here. This presentation really is kind of a whistle-stop tour of the key findings of the report, and we'd be really keen to continue the conversation in our Q&A. Now, when looking at the responses to the report, to the survey, it really became clear that the women and girls sector is really made up of experts. It's community-led. These are organisations which are typically small and embedded in local communities, who are uniquely positioned to support women and girls where they are at. So many of these organisations are delivery focused, with almost 3/4 of those responding focusing on frontline provision, be that offering emergency accommodation and refuge support, providing clinical medical care, to offering training and education programs to women and girls. There's a real sense throughout so many of the responses, all of the responses, that these are organisations that are really driven by their purpose. Their welfare and well-being of women and girls is at the heart of what they do. And in order to support these women and girls, so many organisations are flexible, they're adaptive to meet the needs of those that require them. As well as throughout all of the report and all of the survey, there was just a real sense that these are organisations who are under the radar. They're under the radar for policymakers, they're under the radar to funders of the kind of work that they are doing. And in a huge part because of this, they are under serious pressure. And we're going to talk in a little bit more detail about what this pressure looks like. And really, just to start off with, it's really seeing a huge amount of demand. Demand is the most pressing issue across the sector. Of those responding, over 9 in 10 organisations reported an increase in demand over the last 12 months. And what is really striking is, although we've seen a similar story from our research across the wider charity sector, looking at all different types of organisations, it's significantly higher for women and girls organisations. And it's not just the scale of need that is concerning, it's also the nature of need. 1 in 3 organisations responded cited growing complexity of needs as a major sector-wide challenge. And as this respondent highlights, complex needs require sustainable resources and well-equipped staff. Now, this is particularly important given that the rates of demand show no sign of slowing down. When asked the question, what do you expect demand to look like over the next 12 months? Not a single respondent expected demand to decline. But so many organisations are worried about whether they have the capacity and resources to meet this growing demand. Although over half, as we can see here, think they might meet rising demand, this is just barely. What's more, 44% predict that they might fall short. And as we see in the chart here, 16% think that they will fall significantly short of meeting the needs of their women and girls that need it most. So what's going on? Why is demand rising and yet they're not feeling as if they can meet these challenges? A huge part of this seems to be coming down to funding options. With limited funding options, organisations are being asked to do more, but with less. Responses indicate that the nature of funding is one of the most critical barriers to meeting increased need. Funding and income-related issues dominate organisational and operational concerns, Sorry, I appreciate this chart is quite a lot to take in. But what you can see right at the top there is that the top 3 concerns regarding for the organisations as a whole revolve around funding, and that's be that from where the funding is coming from, who else is applying for that funding, and how long that funding will last. And notably, you can also see that a lack of ring-fence funding is also not an insignificant worry. More than 1 in 10 responded that this is a significant concern. Now, when we're thinking about why funding is such a big concern for organisations, we can really take a look at where the funding is coming from. Responses reveal that many groups and organisations rely heavily on a narrow set of funding sources. At the top here, you can see that over 80% depend mostly on trusts and foundations. And now we can also see that the funding does come from the government, and it is still important, but this often comes with challenges. So many of the responses throughout the survey in the open response boxes, they really shared a frustration with the nature of government funding. Respondents shared ideas and frustrations around how local authorities had taken services back in-house, the nature and concerns around subcontracting and how that hides the impact for smaller groups. There's also a sense that when we're looking through the report and when we're looking at the findings, we were able to control and look at the organisations by different size. And it's really notable throughout the responses that actually it is those bigger organisations that are winning most of those government contracts. And we also know that even when funding is secured, there's little long-term security. Now, for me, these 2 responses really brought these statistics to life. First, we've got a survey respondent saying that they are the only women-led organisation in their area, and they've already merged and changed and adapted to meet people's needs and also to respond to the commissioning requirements. And yet they've had to compete against larger organisations, which is soul destroying, especially when commissioners say that you work well, but then they don't recommission you. The second quote here is from a small Black women's organisation, and putting it in context, they said that commissioning simply doesn't work for the sector. Trust and foundation grants provide a lifeline. But we also know that arguably, the way that grant application models are set up may also be adding to the workload of staff who were already on the brink. Mounting pressures are really hitting hard, both on the financial health and staff wellbeing across women and girls organisations. Oh, apologies about the slide here with the there's a little bit of cut off, but you're not missing out on anything here. It's saying that reserved staffing and services have all been impacted by wider pressures. And what we're seeing here is that organisations are facing tough decisions in response to growing pressures. Some have dipped into reserves, although not all have that options. Others are dealing with workforce strain by leaving vacancies unfilled, by cutting staff hours and making redundancies. Most worryingly, over a quarter have reduced their services and 11% have raised prices. These changes risk shutting out the very women and girls who depend on these services the most. Now, it's also important to remember who we are talking about here. We're talking about, in so many ways, the by and for organisations. These are groups led by the people from the very communities that they support. As one small women's group put it clearly, we're doing some amazing projects which the community loves, but it also means that we're devaluing the skills of women by not paying them for the work they're doing, or we're paying them a pittance. So I've painted what might be a slightly depressing state of the sector, but what has really been really incredible about doing this research and looking into what is going on across the sector and how organizations are facing the same challenges. There are shared challenges across different types of organizations. What we're also seeing is a shared hope. And despite significant challenges, the sector remains committed to making meaningful and lasting progress in the lives of women and girls. And this commitment is coming through in clear shared hopes. Organisations are not just focused on surviving, they're really pushing forward with ambition. They want to keep delivering specialist services and strengthen their voice across all levels of government and to funders. And that means, as well as delivering more services, organisations want to diversify their funding sourcing. They want to improve data and impact systems, and they want to embed better processes. And a theme that came out from all these different responses, as well as a huge number of the open responses, was this drive to collaborate, to share knowledge, to build partnerships, and to support each other. It was really clear that collaboration isn't just a nice to have, it's essential for the future of the sector. So now this really was a whistle-stop tour, and I'd love to hear more about what your reflections are and to really get into the nitty-gritty in the Q&A. But I'd just like to reflect a little on what this survey has told us this time round. As Rebecca mentioned at the start, this is the first State of the Sector survey to look at the data, to look at where we're at. And when I'm looking forward and thinking about where I'd like to see the sector go over the next few years, I hope it remains community-led, delivery-focused and purpose-driven, but I'd really hope that it is also supported and collaborative. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Beth, for that great overview of the report, and just wait for everybody to come back. So do start putting in your questions. We'd love to hear your thoughts and for you to be part of the discussion. I'm going to come to Rebecca first, just to start us off with. I think you're in a really privileged position as being one of those funders who do fund the work of these organisations. It'd be good just to hear your reflections of, you know, what's the difference that you hear these organisations making, and why is the girls and social women's sector so valuable?
Thanks, Robina, and thanks, Beth, for taking us through the data, which is so critical to understand. At Rosa, the reason why we really value the women and girls sector, and really the reason why we were kind of set up 18 years ago, is because women-led women's organisations are the driver of change. They drive change and critical support for individuals and for communities and for wider society. And whether it's, you know, delivering a frontline service or influencing for legislative change, and some organisations do both and some organisations focus on one or the other, they are the ones that are really challenging the sexism, the misogyny, addressing the racism that harms so many women and girls' lives. And actually, at the heart of fighting for, you know, to challenge discrimination against women and girls has been women's organisations throughout history. If you look at the last 200 years, every single progress in women's and girls' lives has been fought for and won by women like Cecily and Lola and thousands of women across the country who have come together to create that kind of change. And that's what we're striving to do at Rosa in trying to get that money to women-led women's organisations. There are loads of organisations out there delivering good work for women and girls, but it's when they are set up specifically for and by women that the real change happens, because those women are there holding the space and doing that hard work day in, day out. And that's why we are so proud to invest in them and why they need the investment.
Thank you. I'm going to move on to kind of Lola and Cecily, just to share your reflections of working in the sector. And I think particularly in the report, some of the work highlighted that there's particularly a disproportionate impact on Black and minoritised women-led charities. So Cecily, maybe just kind of sharing your reflections, you know, your experience of, you know, working in a charity such as this, setting it up, and the kind of the issues you face, but also the difference you make.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you so much, Rubina, Becky, and Rebecca, taking us through that so far, because that report speaks to the very experience that we have on a daily basis. I mean, most of these grassroots communities, very small in size, make the most difference that we can ever think of. Remember, they are all founded on the basis of being the change that they seek. And as Rebecca has highlighted, their women are known to have driven the change in the social or communities that we have. I mean, for us, we celebrated 20 years last year, and we're very, very women-led and very, very grassroots, with the resources is quite small, but the funding that we get, especially with the advent of COVID, it made us, that was through Rosa and the Rotary funding, it made us feel at least somebody notices what we are doing. And we started thriving and, flourishing. But it's when the funding came to an end, and now we are about to finish another one. The fear of going back to where we started is quite real. And even looking at the impact that us we've had in women, where they are having the confidence, whereas before, behind the smiles they have is that untapped potential that we have seen in the last few years. But all that is going to an end. Where do we begin? Where do we now come back to, convince them that they can still do it? And that is the greatest fear that we have at the moment. We want to get to that point that we feel we can still flourish by continuing being that change that we want out of the confidence that we have built in the women. And remember, life's experiences are inevitable, difficult experiences, but actually behind that, there is a woman who has a lot to offer in impacting positively on another woman's life. So the fear is real, but we are hopeful that organizations like LOSA will be there to support. And this is why collaborative work is quite useful, as the report has concluded.
Thank you. Thank you. And just Lola, just kind of picking up on that point, and particularly you're in a charity that works in quite a different way, and it'd be good to understand your perspective.
Definitely. And again, thanks for having me and representing Blossom. So yes, Blossom is very grassroots, grass-led, and led by women in the community. It was actually founded based on my challenges that I had growing up in Southeast London. I had the fortunate opportunities to do mentorship programs, work experience, do travel abroad programs, but many young women in my community did not have those opportunities. So that's why I founded Blossom, to ensure that every young woman, no matter their background, their postcode, have these opportunities to see what is there beyond their postcode. And the way we actually structure our programs is that we conduct thorough research before we even partner with a school or enter any community. And this takes a lot of research, takes a lot of effort to really ensure that we are, youth-centered delivery, and ensuring that the programs we deliver have been voiced by the young people that we work with. And then from there, actually entering these schools and providing a free program for the school. So that means hiring facilitators from the local community, training them, paying for travel, lunch, even some of the work experience opportunities we provide for the girls, we cover their travel. And, the way we are structured is a social enterprise. So we heavily focus on funding from organizations like Rosa, but we also have another stream of funding that we do focus on, which is the private sector, and how we actually collaborate with private sector institutions as well. And this ecosystem that we have built has allowed us to say, okay, the funding from Rosa has stopped. How can we leverage other pools of funding to support that as well? So we've created this ecosystem where there is a balance where, okay, if we do not have funding, we still have a reliance on private sector organizations. And that has allowed us to scale more quickly than we initially thought. However, we're now in a predicament, in a scenario where we are trying to scale very quickly, launch our programs across different boroughs in London. And unfortunately, we've applied for maybe 5 fundings this year, and we have not been able to secure any because of the influx of people who are actually applying for these. So there was funding that we applied for, and they were only giving out around 1 million to 30 institutions. However, 300 organizations applied for this, and they haven't kind of broken down where this funding has gone. But I imagine there was a low percentage of women organizations applying. Therefore, that means that we've had to specifically focus on, key boroughs. Then rather than thinking, okay, we can be in 5 boroughs, 6 boroughs, we have to specifically focus on one. So that has restricted us in terms of our scaling as well. And even, for example, Rosa, when we got our first funding from Rosa allowed us to hire our first employee. We were able to hire a full-time program manager. We were able to do some business development. We were able to partner with some organization who quickly looked at our organization and did a diagnostic. So you can imagine how these fundings, once they're pulled back or they're reduced, it impacts an organization heavily in terms of, okay, we have a great program, we have a great structure, we've piloted the program, it can scale and it can impact thousands or let alone millions of young girls' lives in the UK. Once that funding has pulled back, that reduces, the impact reduces. So that's where we kind of are being a social enterprise. Yes, we do have the fortunate opportunity to rely on private sector and government funding. However, the funding, once it's pulled, it reduces the impact that we would like to make.
Thank you. And that's, both Lola and Cecily, you really kind of highlighted how you started off as grassroots organisations, and Cecily, the fact that, you were able to grow and now you're in a position where you might need to pull back, and Lola kind of similarly. I mean, it's really, I suppose I come from working in a privileged, much larger charity, and we're struggling to reach the many kind of communities you're working with, and we see working in partnership and in collaboration with smaller grassroots charities as being key to driving some of the work that we do. So I think there's a question for us as well as how bigger charities we collaborate and partner and support and fund, the smaller charities that are there in the already out there and reaching out into those communities. But Rebecca, it'd be interesting to get your views just on that. How do we really progress with funding? I mean, Beth really highlighted also that issue with government funding, where a lot of the money that sits there goes into these bigger organisations, and the problem there. And so then it's often the trusts and foundations who are very much oversubscribed and often have smaller pots of money that are left to support organisations. So it'd be good just to get your view on how do we move ahead with these in this financial situation.
I think it's a really important question, Robina, and I think it's a very tricky one, particularly at this moment in time. And one of the things that we at Rosa are calling for is for more trusts and foundations to explicitly prioritise funding for women's and girls' organisations. It's a very small number of funders that do prioritise funding to the women and girls sector. So for one thing is for trusts and foundations to be more explicit in their prioritisation. You'll see in the report there's a big piece around commissioning, and for some of the women and girls sector, this is a very, very important part of ways in which they can access statutory funding, and they're simply not getting the opportunity to do that at source. And instead, what's happening is that they're being subcontracted by the big gender-neutral, race-neutral providers, and yet they're still expected to provide what is often quite complex, community-based, critical work to individual women and girls for tuppence, for absolutely no money at all. And that disparity is going to crush women's and girls' organisations. So our message at Rosa is very much to the institutional and philanthropic funders, trusts and foundations. We want to see you prioritising women and girls' work, but to the statutory funders, that the way in which they prioritise those larger organisations is absolutely harming the ability of women's and girls' organisations to deliver work and deliver the services that women and girls want. You know, I think it's really important that at the heart of all of this, and the work that Lola does, the work that Cecily does, the reason why their organisations thrive is because it's what women and girls want. And we need to therefore ensure that the sector responds to that need as well of women and girls.
Thank you. And Beth, I just want to pick up on this point that you've also made within the report around, and that Rebecca has highlighted, is just around how undervalued the sector is, but not just the sector as a whole, but the individuals working within the sector. So, you know, just asking people to do things for free, or not recognizing the contributions that they're making. You know, the charity sector as a whole, people feel is kind of underfunded, but in this space it's even more acute. So I suppose one of the questions is, how can organizations ensure that the workforce that they're supporting, you know, is avoiding burnouts, and that people do want to carry on doing these roles and, you know, stay in this sector, because there are issues around kind of scalability and growth. What did you hear through the report?
Yeah, thank you so much. I think it's such a great question, and throughout so much of the report there were stories and just of people coming forward and saying this is having such a big impact on our staff's well-being. Burnout seems to be almost the norm at this point, and you're seeing high turnover, you're seeing low salaries, you're just seeing such a disproportionate impact on the women who work in the sector. And as Rebecca highlights, these are the women who are in need of the work as well. And I think there's some steps that some organizations may be able to take around setting clear boundaries around work hours, creating peer support systems, and really doing what we're doing here, which is making space for open and honest conversations around the challenges across the sector, and knowing that it's not something that is a burden placed on you as an individual. And I also think it's really important to talk about the burden that should not just be with the women and girls organisations, the smaller charities alone. It's like you say, Rubina, it's talking a little bit more about what those larger charities can do, how the funder and different infrastructure bodies all have a role to play, not just in the funding process, but also in the everyday working lives of the staff in those organisations. So that could be perhaps offering and sharing resources and tools, offering accessible training and initiatives, and really advocating for funding models that support staff care and also staff development, because that is something that really came throughout the responses as well. These are organisations that have been set up in response to acute need, and we want them to be sustainable so we can make that long-term change.
Thank you. And we've got loads of questions kind of coming through. So I'm going to start asking some of the questions that are coming from the floor. So actually, Beth, I'm going to come to you first, just because it's a question on the report itself. So this is a question from Leah Selinger. Did the research identify any examples of how organisations are responding to the financial challenges as outlined in order to increase their sustainability and reduce reliance on grants?
That's a great question, Leah. And the report really the responses really highlighted that the women and girls sector is doing what it does best, and that's being flexible and being adaptive. You're seeing them really look at diversifying different funding models. They're looking at what they can do to flex and see whether they can go to different types of funding pots. There are also the challenges of the wider sector, and as Rebecca pointed to, the wider funding crisis that is going on is that is still having that knock-on effect, and we're seeing some elements where services are being cut down or changed in order to deliver more, but deliver more with less. So it's a yes and no answer, I'm afraid. I'd be more than happy to send a follow-up email to go into more details.
Thank you. And Rebecca, I'm going to come to you for the next question. This one's from Kula at Represent Women. The question, are member organisations by and for women organisations in the North East, gets asked all the time is why women only? This is the age-old question. What resources and research can we direct them to that makes this case in terms of funders and commissioners' value?
Well, I hope you can direct them to Rosa's mapping research from 2023 and to this report that shows the value added by the women and girls sector. But actually, it's a really important question from Colour, because it's one that many organisations and we talk about a lot at Rosa. And what lies at the heart of it for us at Rosa is women's and girls organisations are ultimately the only ones who ever create the real and lasting change for women and girls. It's not to say that there aren't organisations that have a history of doing some good work, gender neutral organisations working on specific issues, but when the funding runs out for that work, they will move on. And the thing about women's and girls organisations is they never move on. If you are set up, if you're Lola or Cecily, if you stop working on women's and girls issues, you simply wouldn't exist, because that's what your whole mission and purpose is for. And Beth talked about the fact that in the research, these organisations are driven by mission and purpose, and their mission and purpose is to support individual women to address the systemic misogyny and racism and inequality that so many women and girls face, to defend our rights, to win our rights, and we are the only ones doing it. So I think it's a really I'd like to urge women's and girls organisations to feel more confident in being able to say, you need to fund us because we are the only ones doing this, and we are the only ones who are always, always here. When the bandwagons move on, when people's interests move on, we are still here doing that really, really important work locally and nationally, and actually globally in some instances.
Thanks, Rebecca. That's a great answer. The next question is from Caroline at She's UCIC, and I might come to each of you in turn for this. So what advice would you give to a women and girls organisation that is currently underfunded, but the demand for the services is still there? So Cecily, I might come to you first on this one.
And it's a tough one there, Rubina and Cassidy, who has asked that question. But really, when you the confidence that women have so far gained, what we tend to see is that it affects everybody else around their life, and that especially the family around them, including the boys and the men in their lives. So it's that holistic impact that is felt. And that confidence also allows them to reach out to other organizations and think about partnership work that may benefit the work that they are doing. But more so, volunteering. Again, there is no joy in one working for no pay. In effect, you'll be disempowering them. But that and volunteering gives them the opportunity and the confidence to actually go for more economically reassuring and empowering initiatives that could be out there. So partnership work and the extension of social networks helps.
Thank you. And Lola, this is something that you're experiencing at the moment, where you're trying to scale because the work that you're doing is so brilliant, but it's really underfunded. So how are you navigating that at the moment?
Yes, so in my organization, and some of my contractors can say, I always believe on sustainability and scalability, and how can we do those? And that's where looking at partnerships with corporate organizations comes into play. So one of our core programs, our flagship program that has scaled amazingly, not only in the UK, but in South Africa, Nigeria, Turkey, is identifying, hey, we have this amazing program. This can contribute to your future talent. If you fund this program for 6 to 9 months, you could potentially get X percentage of these young women applying for your apprenticeship program, your work experience opportunity, and your graduate schemes. So we've created this business model where, one, we're supporting these corporates build a future talent pipeline. 2, we're still being able to mentor, encourage, develop these young women who come to us and need the support. And then 3, you're building this pool of young people who could work for a fast consumer goods company, work for, a leading UK bank. They could work for a private equity firm. So where we saw that, okay, funding is becoming an issue, we created a pitch. I pitched to nearly 20 corporate organizations in London who are FTSE 500. you know, 6 of them got back to me and they are fully paying for these programs. So when funding, there's a lack, pivot your business a little bit, pivot your charity a little bit to say, how can we partner with these corporate organizations who do have a CSR policy, who do have budgets to support organizations, especially in the local community? So if you're in East London, what corporate institution is there that is close to your organization that you could potentially help youth unemployment, you could help after school care, you could help food nutrition, things like that. So that's what we've been doing. Secondly, something that we're looking at this year is we have a ton of research that we've done with young people in the UK, in boroughs of Croydon, Greenwich Borough, Croydon Borough. How can you leverage this resource? So now we're trying to package some of these researches and blueprint them to say, this is something that you could utilize in your borough. So think about the services that you have that you could package and blueprint and also offer as a service to local government, to local organizations as well.
Thank you. That's a really great response. I don't know, Rebecca, if you've got anything to add from examples you're hearing from organisations you funded.
Oh, sorry then. Sorry, Rubina, say the question again. Which one are we on?
So this was just about with organisations currently being underfunded, but the demand is still there for the services. How do you continue to grow?
I mean, I don't feel like I've got much more to add than Beth's points about what women's organisations are being forced to do, and the point that Lola has made. I think if one has something that can grow and is sustainable, can be scaled, that's great. But for us at Rosa, women's organisations that don't scale are still doing really, really critically important work in their communities. And not everything is built for that scale, but we still want to see the funding for them prioritised so that they can thrive. And that's our really big concern.
Thank you. The next question is from Cassie at Unlocking Potential. She asks, how can grassroots organisations add tangible changes to their intervention planning to include simple but powerful ideas that will empower the girls and the boys they work with to think and behave differently so that revolution or evolution can happen and young people go forward to create the next generation that heals the complex history and wounds of the past? And I think, particularly at this time, this might be a really relevant conversation around how do organisations continue to support going forward. So I don't know who wants to take that one. I don't know, Cecily, whether you want to answer that one.
Just to say that it's a difficult one given the circumstances that there are, and yet growth has been seen out of the funding that was given, the structure that has been developed, but it's how we can sustain that. But it's really stretching to continue supporting the women so that they can maximize the benefits they have so far received, with the hope that more resources will be found somewhere to keep that work going. But it's one that is going to take time, because how do you keep a staff member who has been full-time to reduce the hours, to still support their family members and still continue providing the service that they are currently providing? So it's one that we are stretching, but actually one that we can effectively do if there is that assurance that the resources that are required are there.
Thank you. Beth, I'm going to come to you next because this is a question from Eliza. given the extreme funding pressure, did the research reveal any overlaps in services that could encourage some of the organisations perhaps to merge or find ways to scale or make funds go further? And you might see this, Rebecca, as well, in terms of, is there room for, and we'll come on to this in terms of more collaboration and kind of merging, I suppose. So Beth, don't know whether there were any insights in the report on that.
Yeah, that's a great question. There were some examples given, just a couple, I should say, just a few, where there was overlap in services, but it was largely between those much smaller micro organizations and larger charities. And there were kind of questions there about the power dynamics and the relationships between those larger organizations and the smaller organizations. So the research really shed light on how there could be merging and just questions around duplication and best practice learning, but also how those larger organizations need to think quite carefully about how those relationships are going to be set out and played going forwards. So I think there's definitely room for a continuing conversation about that and how collaboration can work best in practice.
Yeah, Rebecca, it'd be good to get your views on that, because it's especially that one around the power dynamics, especially between the very small and the very large organisations. And actually, if a large organisation takes over a small organisation, do you lose that authenticity and that, you know, closeness to the communities that you're working with?
Absolutely, Robina. I think that's a really, really important point, and it's a great question from Elisa. And it's one that we do get asked about at Rosa. And our perspective is we're never the experts on the work that women's and girls' organisations are doing on the ground. And if it works for them to engage in mergers, then they should do that. But if it doesn't work for them, then they absolutely shouldn't. And there should be no pressure on them to do so. Because sometimes when you're looking at an organisation from the outside, it looks like they're doing that there's duplication. But actually from the inside, what they're doing is very, very different. And we have to respect their right to stay small and to operate in the way that works best for them. And I worry sometimes that the kind of funding world looks in from the outside and says, oh, I think you could do this differently, having never actually run a small women's organisation in a rural community or in a city where they're kind of grappling with a lot of quite complex issues, or indeed run an organisation that's trying to deliver legislative change and trying to influence those with power. So I'm nervous of anything that tells women's organisations that you should be doing things differently. I do think there's a big call in the report, very, very powerful call for more opportunities for collaboration. And what comes off really strongly is that when organisations get the funding that they need and have security in their funding, then they can have the headspace to do that really important collaboration work that allows them to go in it with their eyes wide open, where those power dynamics can be really well thought through. But if they're being crushed, it's sort of driven into it because of a funding crisis, then you end up with a very distorted version of the thing that everyone's trying to achieve. And that's not something that we could get on board with at Rosa.
Thank you. And I am still here. The lights go off automatically in this room, so I often have to wave my hands about a little bit. There you go. It's switched on again. But the next two questions I'm going to link together, because actually this was a topic we were going to move on to, which is really around the politics and the policies a little bit. So, you know, really, how can the sector work together to influence government, and particularly its ambition around violence against women and girls? And actually this government has been quite proactive in stating what some of those ambitions are. And also, you know, in terms of that kind of power, how do we work together, and where does some of that power sit in the report? You know, so who are the actors and decision makers that have the power and ability to make some of these changes? So Beth, I might come to you first, and then I'll come to the rest of the panel.
I think those are great questions, and it's thinking about the next steps, right? This report very much sets out the state of the sector, and what I really found reassuring about the writing up the report and the survey findings was seeing there's so much within the sector where there is alignment on views, there is alignment on experiences and what needs to be said to the government. And I think that's a really important step for the sector as a whole, because so much of this, the power holder here is really it's the policymakers. It's those who know that this is the way to make systemic, long-term, sustainable change. If they're the ones with the money pot to unlock that funding, it's also the power is also with us, the charity makers, the data collectors, the survey writers, to continue to talk about this, to advocate and to work and collaborate together.
Thank you. Rebecca?
These are really, really strong questions, actually. And I'd say for us, what's become really clear through doing this report and working with Beth and the rest of the PBE team is that the real audience we're trying to reach through this report is the funders, statutory and trust and foundation institutional funders, ones that work globally, ones that work locally, etc. We want them to change their practice because they hold so much power and influence in terms of the work that women and girls organisations do. But Rose is always looking to collaborate as well with organisations like PBE and others, because we get so much more when we work out with others who aren't always operating in the sector. So the primary audience for this piece of research from Rose's perspective are those who with money and power. And there's a question also about the kind of influence in the government, specifically about VORG. And I think it's a really important question because this government have made much and should be congratulated on their very, very ambitious target of halving violence against women and girls in the next decade. I am disappointed they haven't said male violence against women and girls. I think we do have to name the actor in this situation as well. And what we have said to government, and I have personally said it to ministers of state, is if you do not invest in women's and girls' organisations, you will not reach that target. That is the absolute cast iron truth of it. If you invest in large gender-neutral organisations that tell you they can solve it, your money will not go as far as it could as if you invested in those really critical organisations operating up and down the country. And we need to also see investment in those organisations that are influencing policy and providing the data and evidence, as Beth has talked about, that help all women's and girls' organisations make the case as to why the investment should be going to them and why government needs to be doing what it does. That government only has that target because women's organisations have been talking about this issue for 50 long years. That's why they've got that target now. And we should be really proud of what we've influenced. We'd like some funding, please. Thank you very much.
And Lola and Cecily, as those frontline small organisations, what do you have to say to some of the policymakers and the decision makers? What would be the thing that makes the biggest difference to your organisations? And Cecily, maybe I'll come to you first. Oh, I think Cecily might have frozen, so I might come to you, Lola, then first. Oh, Cecily, you're back.
Oh, yes. I feel that the grassroots communities have the opportunity to keep their voice counting in influencing for change. And the best they can do that is continuing knowing that their voice counts and making it, in the loudest way possible, but to the right people.
Thank you. That's really succinct. Lola.
For me, especially in the work that we do, is, some of these contracts, we've applied for some government, like the big contracts from like the Mayor of London's office and things like that. And unfortunately, we haven't got it, or the application is way too long. So again, how do we work with some larger organizations and get that subcontract from that? And how do we, I think for me, what plays a big part in this is like the whole partnership. I think this is really important from policymakers, educational institutions, private sector, charities, actually working together and saying, let's all come together, pool funding in, streamline funding here, there, and let's make it work. I think that's how we would start to move as organizations, like trying to create impact. So I think for me, is like, how do we really bring a strong partnership amongst all of this?
Thank you. Yeah, no, I completely agree. Right, we're coming up to the last 5 minutes. So I'm going to give you each a minute for closing comments, really. So I'll come to each of you just to give final thoughts and reflections. Cecily, we lost you for a bit, but you're back. But I've just said we're coming up to our last 5 minutes. So I'm going to come to each of you for to share some final thoughts. But Beth, I might come to you first as kind of PBE perspective. What next? And
first, I just want to say, from almost a personal perspective, this has been a really rewarding piece of work to do, in part because of what Rebecca said right at the beginning about the history of activism. I'm a historian by training, and sometimes you reflect back on what's happened in the past, and you're not always that positive about it. But actually, when we're thinking about activism and when we're thinking about women's rights and women's progress, just being able to articulate that and looking at how much of that change is down to organizations that we are talking about today, an organization like Lola's and Cecily's. And it's incredibly empowering for me and powerful for all of us to continue to have these conversations. I think the second part, and perhaps more from that PBE lens, is about how really this is a state of the sector report. It's looking at where we are now, where the women and girls organizations feel they're at, and where they want to go next. And I think there are conversations that really are being set up and continuing about collaboration and what collaboration really does look like. What do we mean when we're talking about collaboration? That's the next conversation I think is really important for us to be having. And like Lola says, that's about not just talking about collaboration within the sector, but it's about having those meaningful partnerships, thinking about the corporate spaces, thinking about policymakers and policy influencers who work within the charity sector, but not just on women and girls organizations, but thinking about those kind of data collection, how we advocate and influence. It's continuing that conversation and being more open and loud about it.
Thank you. Lola, final comments from you.
Yeah, and I'll do this from the lens as a founder of an organization running for 7 years. I think just having the confidence in your organization, knowing that you are delivering great impact and the UK needs to hear about it. So how can you do that? And I know there's the funding constraints, there's the, lack of employment or hiring of people. But I think just having confidence in your ability and confidence in your organization, like Rosa was our first ever largest funding that we got. And from that has unlocked multiple funding from the BBC Children in Need, KFC Foundation, and so on and so forth. So once you get that large pot of funding, how can you really leverage that to open more doors? And I'll pose a question to everyone to think about how they're doing that in their organization. As I mentioned earlier on, is it a service that you could sell to corporates? Is it, funneling that in to improve your business? Like really thinking about, okay, I have this grant, I have this funding, how can I make this last 5 years and like triple it? So I would say as an organization owner, just really thinking about and having that confidence that I believe in my organization, I believe the services that we offer. People need to see this. People need to buy into this. So I would leave that with everyone. But yeah, again, thanks to Rosa. Like you have opened so many doors for us. From that one funding that we got early on has helped us a lot. So thank you.
And Cecily?
Yes, I would really also reinforce that and say thank you to LOSA, because I happen to have to see when they started and to be a beneficiary over the years, to take us through that journey to a point where now we have a system that seems to work, but a system that I hope is going to be sustained through continued funding. But also is the confidence we have as a small grassroots communities, believing in what we do because of the outcomes that we see in the development of women, and that impact, how it spreads to the wider family members and the wider society. So thank you for having us as To Lead Women.
Thank you. And Rebecca, final word to you.
Yep, I'll be really quick. So we're going to try and get this report out to as many trusts and foundations and philanthropists and funders as we can. We very much urge you all to quote it, to use it, to look at our other research, use it as much as you can, because it's designed to support you in your work as well as us in our work of trying to get more money to all of you. And that's what Rosa exists to do. We exist to champion the work of the women and girls sector and to ensure that there is more funding going to the women and girls sector. That is in our lifeblood. I want to say a big thank you to everybody who did complete the survey. It is because of the work that you did that we have been able to produce the report. So massive, massive thanks for that. And obviously a huge thanks to Beth for all the work that she's done with PBE in getting the report done. And also, finally, if anybody wants to keep in touch with Rosa's work, do sign up to our newsletter. But basically, we will be promoting this work as much as possible because we really, and I can see in the questions, women's organisations are critical and they are desperate. We hear that and we are here to help as much as we can.
Right, thank you. And thank you all so much for joining us today. And thank you to our panel members for all your brilliant contributions. We're definitely over time by a minute, so I hope that's okay. But just to reiterate, the report's now available on the website, so do have a look at that. And to hear more about the future events like this, please sign up to the PBE newsletter. But thank you very much, and goodbye.